Hello and welcome to another edition of Robbie Reel's Final Picks. In this edition we're going to take a review track by track of the great Beatles' first album, Please Please Me. So, for all those that don't know the Beatles, it's quite simple. There's four of them. There's John Lennon, who's rhythm guitar and sometimes mouth organ, Paul McCartney, who plays the bass, George Harrison, lead guitar, and Ringo Starr, who plays the drums. Together, they all perform vocals on this album, and as we go through this album, we hope to uncover some of the high and low points of this first album. So let's take you back to 1962, where it all happened for the Fab Four. Fab as they might be, this was probably the quickest and easiest album they ever recorded in their history. The recording was quick. In fact, it took one day. In multiple sessions, they created this wonderful 14-track album. So in 1962, the Beatles released Love Me Do, their very first ever single. Now there were several versions of this recorded, one being on the 6th of June, that was the Pete Best recording. By the time Ringo had joined the band, it was actually the 4th of September. By the time the recording session came to recording their first album, Please Please Me, this time George Martin decided that he didn't want Ringo to appear on the track. So he got a session drummer in called Andy White. He replaced him on the album version that you're quite frequently to hear. The single version, however, will feature those glorious drum fills by Ringo. 8 of the tracks of Please Please Me would be written by McCartney and Lennon, not Lennon and McCartney. That's how they did it in those days. However, these 8 songs were the songs that they had written recently and performed in several clubs along their way. The other tracks on this album go to other artists that were around at the time, things that influenced them, things that made them feel happy about recording music. So they put a couple of their favourites on. So now I think it's time to move on from that and start reviewing this track by track. So the first and opening track that a Beatles album would ever have would be I Saw Her Standing There, a McCartney written song that was perfectly exquisite to open any album. It's rocking, it's upbeat, and it's got all the good feeling that it needed to be a good Beatles track. A good opener, no problems at all. Next up, it's Misery, a Lennon and McCartney joint effort with Lennon on lead vocals and George Martin on the piano. Quite a great track, simple, easy and very short. Standard stuff for the 60s beat. However, this is the very first ever song to be covered by another artist in the Beatles catalogue. We move on to track 3. And we come to our first cover, Anna, Go to Him. An Arthur Alexandra song that was released at the same time they were recording, so it was fairly new and fresh in the hit parade at the time. Next, we come to Chains, track 4. This is the first track that we see George Harrison on vocals. This was a song that was popularised by the Cookies, Little Eve's backing singers. They only managed to get to number 17 in the US in November of 1962. Next up, it's Boys, and we have Ringo in good old fashion on lead vocals in this one. This was a hit for the Shirelles, a B-side to their big hit Will You Love Me Tomorrow, recorded and released in November 1960. Now we come to 4 tracks written by Lennon and McCartney, or in those days McCartney and Lennon. The first one is Ask Me Why, the B-side to their next single Please Please Me, which was released in 1963. This would then follow on track 7, so we have a B-side followed by the A. Great stuff, 2 good original songs. Ask Me Why falls flat a little bit at times, but Please Please Me is definitely a rocker and earned the band their first number 1. As we flip the record over, we come to side 2, and we start with their first single, Love Me Do. As we've already discussed, this was really a simple song, 3 chords and a simple beat. On the B side, which is track 9, is P.S. I Love You. Another great track, a nice little slow number with a lot of empathy in the writing. Great stuff. Now we move on to track 10, and it's Baby, It's You. Another Shirelles hit from 1960. This time we have Lennon on the lead vocals, and by gall, does he do a good job of this one. We move on to our next track, another Lennon and McCartney classic, Do You Want to Know a Secret? Yet again, George is on lead vocals on this one, and yeah, this was pretty good. This one does stand the test of time, so much so that it's been recorded by several artists during the 60s. Most notably though, Billy J, Kramer and the Dakotahs. Next, track 12, A Taste of Honey. Yet again, another cover. This time, a pop standard written by Bobby Scott and Rick Marlowe. An instrumental that was written for the Broadway play of the same name. But it was Herb Alpert in 1965 that earned the song 4 Grammy Awards. Track 13 comes in the way of There's a Place, another Lennon and McCartney classic song that was written especially for this album. It's got everything it needs again. It is a true classic in some respects. Got all the beat, got all the upbeatness that it needs and all the tempo. Not really much I can say about this, apart from the last one, track 14, when we end with Twist and Shout, a song that was done in one take because George Martin thought that John couldn't handle it. He tried a second take and he couldn't. On this take, we hear John at his very, very utmost, screaming almost the lyrics. This was a big hit for many artists, and mainly the Top Notes, who released it in 1961. Most notably, the Beatles are probably the most famous. Behind them, probably Brian Paul and the Tremolos. So how does this album fare up? Let's take a look at my vinyl. Well, my vinyl, as you can see, is very battered. See, this was an original 1962 pressing, and it suffers everything a record of that era should suffer. Scratches, dents, nicks on the cover, it all has it. But does it add to the warmthness of the sound? Of course it does. It wouldn't be as classic if it didn't have that feel to it. Hence why I've never replaced the record for a much nicer sounding one. Who wants this fake stereo mix anyway? This is an original mono mix. As you can see, it does look a bit worn. So how does this album fare up for me? In general terms, yeah, it's a good starter album for any artist. And if you listen to the quality of their covers and their own original songs, they do a good job. But it does fall short of being a classic album. It does fall short of being a memorable album. The Beatles still had more to offer, and as we do more vinyl picks, we shall uncover more classic Beatle records. For me, this one, yeah, you could take it or leave it. Until next time, everyone, happy collecting.